Thank you, Victor. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really nice to be back in Texas. I've done a fair amount of economic development work, as Victor mentioned, in places like Azerbaijan, Afghanistan. I was interested to hear Representative Kepper's remarks about the use of the word y'all. You know, back here in Texas, we get to use that. When I was working overseas, there were a fair amount of expatriates from Australia and Europe, and even some from Northern America, up in the north. And when I would use the term y'all, it was either considered bad grammar or worse, required an explanation as to what it meant. So it's great to be back here. A little background on our Institute for Economic Development at WTxEC. We have about 12 programs. There's a small business development program that covers most of South and West Texas, roughly from El Paso to Corpus Christi. We have a similar network of small business development centers in Latin America, parts of South America, Central America. There's a rural business program that covers that same geography in Texas that works with community leaders who years ago were facing issues like brain drain and loss of population, and now obviously have a whole different set of issues that they're having to contend with. My group does the research at UTSA, and we perform a number of economic impact studies. We've done 3 economic impact studies and a workforce analysis on the Eagle Ford Shale. We're working on our 4th economic impact study. We've just completed phase 1 of the West Texas Energy Consortium economic impact study, but we've also done analysis on the San Antonio missions and their impact on the economy out there, repurposing of military bases for commercial use, studies on that, workforce analysis, targeted industry recruitment, etc. And our constituencies really run across the board, from economic development corporations to city, state, federal leadership, businesses, associations, really stakeholders across the board. The role or the function, I guess, of the Institute for Economic Development, I like to describe with a quote from a great modern-day philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So we sort of bridge that academic or theoretical side over at UTSA at the university with policy making role in that real world on the other side. Our research is intended to be read not just by other academics but by policymakers. It's intended to be not theoretical but actionable. I'm going to start with some graphics at a higher level before I drill down into the specific impacts here in West Texas. But Texas has traditionally led the rest of the country in terms of oil production. But because of the activity in West Texas, in South Texas, and the Barnett, as well as the Haynesville up in East Texas, in terms of oil production, we're literally going off the charts. Interestingly, North Dakota has now overtaken both Alaska and California as the 2nd largest oil producer in the country, largely because of the Bakken Shale up there. This is a sort of a map that shows there's an interesting benchmark in terms of oil production. Everybody's watching to see when the Eagle Ford and the Bakken are going to hit 1 million barrels a day worth of production. The Bakken's running at about 900,000 barrels per day. The Eagle Ford is over 650,000 barrels per day in terms of oil production. The Permian Basin actually has already crossed that 1 million barrel per day production mark. So that includes all the counties in the Permian Basin, not just the ones in our study area. But very soon there will be 3 distinct oil fields in the U.S. producing over 1 million barrels of oil per day. Texas is producing more oil than it has in 30 years, and that number is only expected to continue to increase. And so with regard to theories about peak oil, clearly they did not take into account the prospects of the production potential for shale oil and gas that we're seeing now. And so really predictions about peak oil appear to be really kind of out the window. There's a lot of pipeline construction underway in Texas. These are some of the major pipelines that are underway. And what's interesting about this chart, there's a couple of things I guess I want to point out. One is that a lot of the production from the Bakken Shale is getting stuck up at Cushing, Oklahoma, because they just don't have enough pipeline capacity to get it all out of there. They have a lot of storage facilities. They're working on additional pipeline capacity to get more of that Bakken oil down to the Gulf Coast. Happily, most of, in fact, virtually all of the Texas oil doesn't have to go through Cushing to get to the refineries on the Gulf Coast. But there's so much pipeline capacity under construction and so much production in Texas now These pipelines will be completed sometime around the end of next year. And when that occurs, we will have overwhelmed the existing refining capacity on the Gulf Coast. Now, we as a country, we can export natural gas, we can export refined petroleum products, but we can't export crude oil. So what's likely to happen with that oil, unless they'll either have to build additional refining capacity on the Gulf Coast, or some of that oil is going to get shipped to refineries in other parts of the U.S. So we'll see how that goes. But that's just an interesting sort of development that's occurring because of all this unexpected crude oil that's being produced here in the U.S. It's displacing a lot of the oil that we were importing from West African countries because that West African oil tends to be light, sweet crude, same type of oil that's produced here in West Texas. So we're buying less of that and producing more of our own. In fact, we've now reached the point where we are producing more oil than we import as a country. And that's the first time that's happened since 1995. So these shale oil and gas developments are really having some significant global impacts. OPEC is really now just starting to get in fact, in a lot of ways, they're still in a state of denial about the potential impact for shale oil and gas on their business model. It's interesting to note that 46% of all U.S. energy production occurs in really sort of a narrow strip of real estate, which Texas is a key component of that. But I thought this Energy Information Administration map was interesting just to see how much production there is, not only in Texas, but in a lot of the Midwestern states, as you can see on this map. The potential for shale oil and gas is really incredible. This is a shale oil and gas map of the world, and as you can see, there are shale oil and gas deposits located literally all over the planet, and yet the only country where production of any significance at all is occurring is right here in the U.S. That's the case for a couple of reasons. One, the U.S. is virtually unique among countries of the world in that private individuals can own mineral rights. In almost every other country of the world, private mineral rights are owned by either the state, the monarch, or the currently reigning despot of that particular country. And the other reason really has to do with the fact that it was the independent producers that figured out how to unlock the shale oil and gas that was locked inside the rock. It wasn't the major oil companies. In a country like Mexico, for example, the state owns the mineral rights, and there's Pemex, the state-owned oil monopoly. And as we know, monopolies tend not to be particularly innovative or efficient. Now, Mexico and other countries are Mexico in particular is looking at reforming their energy sector, and we'll see how that goes, because they'd like to tap into the shale oil and gas deposits located in the Eagle Ford that extend well beyond the Rio Grande and into their country. Ukraine, China, Argentina are looking at tapping their shale oil and gas deposits, and so before much longer, we expect to see production occurring in other countries. But right now, like I said, the only country in which production of any significance whatsoever is occurring is right here in the U.S. This is just sort of some background with regard to the scope of the study. We've completed phase one of the West Texas Energy Consortium study, and it looked at 6 of what we call the sort of adjacent counties or supporting counties that don't have a lot of production. We may actually have to rethink some of those assumptions, because we are starting to see production in some of these counties. But for this first phase, we looked at the overall impacts and then the adjacent counties. And in phase 2, which will be released sometime next year, we're looking at taking a closer look at the producing counties one by one and getting a sense of what production is occurring out there. So geographically, this is what our study area looked like. We consider the producing counties the ones in green, and then the adjacent counties the ones in orange. Essentially, this is intended to be the baseline study, or at least provide a baseline analysis of construction, well operations, forecasts, tax impacts, and economic impact estimates at the county level. There's a fair amount of predictions, at least in terms of trends, going forward. So I want to caveat our predictions with a few famously bad predictions in the past. This first one by a Decca record executive to the band's manager, saying the Beatles have no future in show business. We don't like your boys. Groups are out. 4-piece groups with guitars particularly are finished. This one's from Robert Metcalf, the inventor of the Ethernet, in 1995, said, "I predict the Internet will soon go spectacularly supernova and in 1996 catastrophically collapse." and this is my favorite from Steve Ballmer, the CEO for Microsoft. There's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance. So, no matter how bad our predictions are, hopefully they won't be as bad as these. So, anyway, we estimate there's about $14 billion of economic impact being generated by the activity in that study area in 2012, supporting about 21,000 full-time jobs, $1 billion in salaries and benefits paid to workers, and you can see the increases or the state revenues, the severance taxes, local government revenues. By 2022, we expect to see $20 billion in economic output. Now, the caveat I want to say is we've actually had to put a range on these estimates. On the low end of the range, we think they could be as low as $7.5 billion, and the high estimate could be $34.2 billion. The other point I want to make is we really haven't seen yet in the study area any sort of what we call an inflection point. As I mentioned, we've done 4 studies, or in the process of doing the 4th study on the Eagle Ford Shale, and our first study with regard to the economic impact for that was very much understated what ultimately happened. And part of the reason for that is we had limited data, and what we had essentially was a sort of a slow trend line in terms of growth. And so we hadn't seen what I call an inflection point where things turned up and growth started occurring exponentially. Now, that's not to say that's what we will see in the study area in West Texas, the Energy Consortium area of analysis that we looked at. But if something like that should happen, then these forecasts will, again, likely turn out to be somewhat conservative, particularly the sort of the middle range forecast that we've got. But this is our best guess right now as to what sort of economic impact we're looking at about 10 years out. About 30,000 full-time jobs, $1.8 billion in salaries, et cetera. And if the growth does occur more slowly than it has in shale plays, the good news about that is it gives the community leaders, the communities in general, more time to plan and put in infrastructure to support the activity that is coming. One of the things that's interesting about, we hear stories about, and it's tough to get information from the producers in really any field, whether it's Eagle Ford, West Texas, whatever. The information they consider to be proprietary. But what we do hear is that the shale in West Texas is different than what they encountered in the Bakken and the Eagle Ford. I've heard analogies like Swiss cheese, that so it's not continuous. It's gooier, but it's much deeper shale. And so in a lot of cases, rather than drilling as many laterals as have been drilled in the Bakken and the Eagle Ford, a lot of the producers in West Texas appear to be just drilling straight down because there are not only the Klein Shale, but the Wolfcamp, the Sprayberry. There are a bunch of different other types of shale, and it's much cheaper to drill a vertical well than a lateral well. Estimates are for it used to cost $10 to $12 million to complete a horizontal well. That cost is now down to about $6 to $8 million, but it's considerably less expensive to drill a vertical well. So different techniques are being experimented with in West Texas, not only in our study area, but west of the study area, and we expect to see a lot of progress made as we go on. It's still a new technology. There's a learning curve involved, and so we expect to see some interesting developments over in the coming years. This is just sort of a completion map of the study area showing what wells have been completed. And as I mentioned, what we're seeing, really didn't expect to find is that there is production occurring out in some of these supposedly non-producing counties. This contrasts with the Eagle Ford, for example, where we had 6 adjacent counties. And even now, there's still no production occurring really in any of those counties. It's really the 14 core counties. But in this, the West Texas, in our study area, we're actually seeing production occurring really throughout the region. Now, obviously, most of it is occurring to the west, and we expect to continue to see sort of a migration westward as more of the shale becomes accessible, as they figure out how to extract the oil and gas from there. But this is sort of a snapshot for 2012 as to what the completion activity in the study area looked like.